Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture, and this is Billboard Breakdown. So one would think upon my return from vacation to take a look at the Hot 100, that things kinda went a little bit crazy this week. Not in the new arrivals to the charts, mind you. If anything, we got the least number of new entries to date, which hopefully means this episode will be a little bit shorter this week. No, the change was when what gained steam and some chart slots this week, because there were a lot of major movers this week that seemingly came out of nowhere. Not only that, they were for songs that came out in 2014, some that had even fallen off the charts altogether. So okay, what gives here? What happened? Now, fortunately, there's actually a reasonably simple explanation for all that, but before we get to it, let's talk about our top 10. Unsurprisingly, Taylor Swift still rules at the top with blank space and airplay still increasing, but she owes her spot at the top mostly thanks to Christmas sales, which are absolutely huge this week in terms of her singles. And this is not the only Taylor Swift song to get that boost. More on this in a little bit, but we've also got our new number 2, as I predicted last week with Uptown Funk from Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars, which also benefited from increased sales and streaming, even as its airplay gains seem to be leveling off a little bit. Now, part of this is a factor of Take Me to Church by Hozier slipping down to number 3, which despite some gains in airplay and sales, doesn't quite have the same lead in streaming that it used to have. Bit of a shame, really. Beneath it, we've got the slight increase from Meghan Trainor's Lips Are Moving rising up to number 4, mostly thanks to consistent gains pretty much across the board, especially as digital sales. And yet, the big surprise for me was Meghan Trainor's other massive overplayed hit, All About That Bass, with a massive rebound to number 5, mostly thanks to streaming, but also getting a pretty sizable airplay boost too. And you go to the next 5 beneath that and things get even stranger. I mean, sure, you got I'm Not the Only One by Sam Smith holding steady at number 6 thanks to consistent streams and airplay. The word of the day with Sam Smith is consistent. But watching Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud drop back to number 7, even despite some solid streams, airplay, and sales, it's mystifying to me. And below that, you get sudden airplay boosts for Animals by Maroon 5 to keep it at number 8, or the even larger gains by Shake It Off by Taylor Swift to hold it at number 9. It was enough that despite some stronger airplay and streaming, Love Me Harder by Ariana Grande and The Weeknd's frustratingly low sales were enough to get it kicked out of the top 10 altogether by Jealous by Nick Jonas, which I'm sorry, that's just wrong in every sense of the word. So okay, what the hell happened here? Well, while this Hot 100 is technically for January 10th, 2015, it represents a week a little bit earlier, and the massive sales boost do show some last-minute Christmas or after Christmas shopping. The place where many of these older hits and so many others made up their major gains was in the radio. And that's because many radio stations love playing year-end lists to give one last shot of airplay to the big hits of the year before they disappear altogether. And now it doesn't account for everything. We still have songs that drop to the recurring on the regular schedule. The generally mediocre About the Money by T.I. featuring Young Thug, Pitbull's stab at remaking Walk This Way with Fireball featuring John Ryan, and the generally enjoyable Girl in the Country song by Maddie and Tay. And you know what, the losers list isn't all that surprising either. Feeling Myself by Nicki Minaj and Beyonce mercifully dropped to number 59, and Nicki's collaboration with Skylar Grey, Better Lies, fell to number 80. But that's because they're songs that pretty much owed all their success to the Pink Prince release. And Pentatonix's Mary Did You Know dropping down to number 67, that's not exactly surprising either, now considering the Christmas season is over. Hell, All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey fell off the charts altogether. And the last two losers, a little bit more surprising, but it's explainable, as Close Your Eyes by Parmalee falls down to 85, and Till It's Gone by Kenny Chesney drops back to 81. But that's just because they're kind of forgettable late album singles from records that I forgot a week after I reviewed them. But it's the gains that need to be discussed here, and oh boy, we got a lot of them. And really, many of them can be explained pretty easily. Rude by Magic going to 35, Steal My Girl by One Direction going up to 51, Try by Kobe Calais for some reason going to 66, the Flawless remix from Beyonce and Nicki Minaj going to 75, In Your Arms by Nico and Vince suddenly getting a second wind and a pretty welcome one going up to number 79, even the absolutely execrable God Made Girls by Ray Lynn that I discussed in length shot up to its newest peak at number 61. But look, when you think about these songs, it'll most likely they'll be associated in your mind with 2014. I don't exactly see their gains really lasting or any of these songs sticking around that further into the new year. Others, though, a little bit trickier. I get some long-coming support for Kid Ink's Body Language with Tinashe and Usher, or the much worse Homegrown Honey by Darius Rucker that I talked about a few weeks ago, and now it's suddenly rising to number 85. But you know what? They've got albums coming. It's very clear where the push is here on the radio. And Lee Bryce singles like Drinking Class, they always take a long time to rise up the charts. This song debuted in September, and now it's only finally reaching number 60 now. And songs like GDFR by Flo Rida featuring Sage Gemini and Lucas going to 58, Time of Our Lives by Pitbull and Neo shooting up to number 46, and Lonely Eyes by Chris Young rising up to number 77. These are natural growths as these songs slowly gain traction in their whole chart life cycle. And sure, Night Changes by One Direction could be following the same path that Story of My Life did, which is good because Night Changes is a great song. But I gotta ask, how do you explain the terrible LA Love by Fergie somehow getting a mild resurgence to number 38? I thought nobody liked that song. Or Often by The Weeknd, a song not supported by an album at all, suddenly rising to number 65. But the most baffling surge for me, at least initially, certainly one of the biggest ones, was Sledgehammer by Fifth Harmony soaring up to number 40. I mean, why? It's not particularly memorable or interesting, but outside of the fact that their long-delayed debut album seems to finally have a release date in late January, yes, I'll be covering it. I have to ask, does anybody really care about Fifth Harmony? I guess some of it might be due to the Christmas sales or that iTunes discount and actually maybe getting an airplay boost. And then when it's one of their biggest hits in the United States, one of the biggest of any girl group since the Spice Girls, as a matter of fact. But it's for this? Outside of ripping off a title from a classic Peter Gabriel song, Sledgehammer? It's not all that interesting. Just saying. And yet, it's not just our gainers that show signs of the last gasp of 2014. Which takes us to our recurring entries, starting with... Okay, seriously, what is this doing here? I thought we, in polite society, decided just to forget that Michael Bay produced disaster reboot for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that had ever existed and thrown deep into the memory hole of terrible pop culture remakes like that RoboCop and Total Recall remakes that you all forgot about and should keep forgetting about because they're terrible. And the fact that we need 3 rappers and 2 producers to create this overcooked disaster of a track speaks volumes, especially when only Juicy J seems to have the slightest clue what he's really rapping about. Wiz Khalifa's verse is slightly better structured than normal, but it's really nothing all that special or memorable, and Ty Dolla $ign contributes barely anything worth remembering. And the production here doesn't help. The overlayered siren-like synths, the beat that always seems a little bit underweight to me, the vocal effects that try to lend the song some real grit and heft that it just doesn't have. It reminds me a lot of a louder, clunkier version of that other Wiz Khalifa soundtrack song with 2 Chainz, We Own It, from last year's Fast and the Furious 6. And yet, that song at least had a melodic hook that had some real punch behind it. It was at least listenable. I will say that Shell Shocked is probably the least offensive thing about the TMNT reboot, but honestly, that ain't saying much. There's a neon light at the end of the tunnel. It ain't all that bright, but even though it's subtle. I already said my piece on this song when I reviewed Blake Shelton's mediocre Bringing Back the Sunshine. It's a lousy song then, it's lousy now. Featuring a thicker twang that just doesn't fit at all with all the stiff drum machines. And Blake Shelton's songwriter showing even more laziness with the needless repeated words just to fill up space. Just another reminder that Blake Shelton's biggest success this year came with Craig Wayne Boyd coming from The Voice. Something big, I feel it happening out of my control. And it's grabbing me, feel it in my bones like, oh, whoa, whoa. Okay, I need to explain this, and to start, we need to talk about Vine. Now, I've been of the opinion that the majority of Vine's contributions to pop music and pop culture have universally sucked, especially for mainstream hip-hop. And yet, Shawn Mendes somehow has parlayed his success on Vine to charting hits, most of which are actually kind of huge up here because this kid is also Canadian, and he's from just outside of Toronto, pretty less than an hour's drive away. So now he's in the top 20 in Canada. And keep in mind, this kid is 16. He's 8 years younger than me. So surely the only reason that something big, why it's huge, it's just preteen girls who are already sick of 5 Seconds of Summer, right? Well, it actually might be more than that. Because this song is actually pretty damn good. Yeah, I can't believe it either. I was prepared to say that this song sucks, but for a simple pop song about capturing that moment of anticipation and pure adrenaline, it works pretty well with the punchy squonk of the horns, the well-layered acoustic guitars, and jangling percussion, a pretty damn solid and listenable bridge, and Shawn Mendes bringing a surprising amount of raw charisma to the table that Justin Bieber wishes he has. Yeah, he's biting pretty hard from Ed Sheeran's template with a smattering of Mumford & Sons in the backing chorus, but you know what? He's got a knack for a melody that's pretty sticky and likable if he really emphasizes it. Just another sign of one of the universal truths in pop music. Whatever's on the Hot 100 in the States, the Canadian charts are always better. Already talked about the song in my first week of Billboard breakdown, and you know what? I'm still kind of mixed on it. Although the problem is, like all the rest of Jessie J's Sweet Talker, it's in the production. Dear God, put this woman on some pop rock where she can be balanced out with some real fire, because this and 2 Chainz, I'm sorry, not a great fit for her. Also, already talked about this song just 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact. Still one of the better songs from Taylor Swift's 1989, and at this point, it's just missing that video to blow it up even bigger. And putting aside the fact that it's likely gonna be the next single, it's not really getting huge promotion. It's only really charting because her album was absolutely huge this year, and radio programmers are probably jumping on the bandwagon early, anticipating the single, or including her in that 2014 send-off because they can. Granted, if you want a bigger example of that,
but you know it used to be mad love, so take a look what you've done, 'cause baby now we got bad blood. Hey!
Okay, I'm sorry, is it just me? Is anyone else really reminded a lot of Avril Lavigne with the song? And I mean that a lot here. The pre-chorus features Taylor Swift imitating Avril Lavigne's vocal delivery. The fragments of acoustic production, they remind me a lot of Here's Never Growing Up, Avril Lavigne's massively ridiculous hit single from 2013 that I actually unironically think is a pretty damn great song. But really, that's Max Martin coming through a lot more than either artist because he's the common element between these songs, as the lyrical tone is really a fair bit different. Now, granted, I like Avril Lavigne, and the influences, they aren't bad here, but let's be blunt here. This is a deep cut from 1989, and it shows. The abuse of percussion, some obvious sloppiness in the songwriting, it's a weaker track. And while I can still enjoy it, it doesn't really reflect some of the elements of 1989 that I liked as much. Still, it's a decent enough song. I guess I'll take it.
Dear future husband, here's a few things you need to know if you wanna be my one and only all my life.
Now, I talked about this song in the December 13th week of Billboard breakdown, and if anything, it's gotten even more grating. Thank God it's only barely catching on here. The charts already have too much Meghan Trainor on it, as they do. And that's it for our recurring entries. Now on to the new arrivals, starting with number 100, Title by Meghan Trainor. Okay, seriously here, is Meghan Trainor trying to release every single song on her debut EP as a single before she finally drops it? Well, okay, now we got the title track, and to her credit, there are some elements I actually kind of like about it. The steel drums, some of the horns and the doo-wop elements, and there's something of a decent groove here that I can kind of like. But it's also such a blatant retread of Dear Future Husband with a few more hip-hop touches and an outright awful bridge. Makes me wonder how much real variety Meghan Trainor can really bring to the table. It's not exactly a bad song, but it is a redundant song. I'd skip it. Number 98, Can't Stop Dancing by Becky G. So I actually sparked a little bit of controversy by saying that I actually kind of like Shower by Becky G. So much so that it landed on my honorable mentions on my year-end list of my favorite hit songs of 2014. I wish I could say the same about Can't Stop Dancing. For as much as I did like Shower, there are some things to like about this song, but not enough. For one, it shows Becky G showing off some of her Latina side. With some of the Caribbean flavors and the acoustic guitars and the backing vocals, does give this song some unique flavor. And yet, it doesn't stick with me as much. Maybe it's the slower tempo, the more washed out, brittle production. Or maybe it's how Becky G is expected to coo sexual entreaties when she's 17. That reminds me way too much of the late 90s pop diva scene. But you know what? This is not really working for me. For a song where she can't stop dancing, this just makes me want to find a spot against the wall. Number 95. Bad Bitch by French Montana featuring Jeremih.
Wish I had another you, I'm greedy. Sometimes I let a nigga get greedy. Goddamn, I fell in love with a bad bitch. You know that every time you leave me.
Oh, wow. Pairing a third-rate Chris Brown wannabe with one of the worst rappers to have gotten popular in recent memory. And you know what? It turns out exactly as bad as you would expect. The sad thing, you know what, is I actually kind of dig the beat and the instrumentation of the song. Sure, it's dark and the bass line's completely leaden and without energy, but those synth arpeggios in the second iteration of the chorus and the outro, they're pretty cool. I like them. And the guitar and the snap percussion, those aren't bad either. But it's just a shame that neither artist in the song has anything worthwhile to say, or the auto-tune smeared over both their voices. It just makes them sound even more anonymous and forgettable. Really, this instrumentation deserved better rappers behind it, or at least a bad rapper that could say something memorable like with OT Genasis on Coco, because this, forget it sucks. Number 93, Stuck on a Feeling by Prince Royce featuring Snoop Dogg. I'll admit, not exactly being incredibly familiar with Prince Royce, even though he's been around for a while. Mostly thanks to my lack of familiarity with a lot of Latin and Spanish flavored music outside of, well, Shakira and Enrique Iglesias. I do recognize a few of his songs though, particularly Darte Beso, which was its highest charting hit in 2013 on the Hot 100, and actually had some pretty damn sweet instrumentation that I really liked. Granted, Prince Royce's crooning tenor wasn't all that interesting for me, but I understand its appeal. His new hit with Snoop Dogg, Stuck on a Feeling, however, takes a very similar path that Enrique Iglesias did with his darker nightclub pickup tracks, and I can't say I dig it all that much, really. Sure, like a tight guitar lick and the wobbling beat were fine, but that incredibly high, thin synth on the chorus got grating really quickly. And Snoop Dogg's verse is something that he could have dropped in his sleep. There's nothing special about it whatsoever. Overall, I can't exactly say that it's a bad song. For what it's trying to do, I can certainly think of worse tracks, especially from Enrique, but the hook is a little bit bare bones here, and it does lack some real personality. At least for me. And finally, number 49, Earned It, 50 Shades of Grey by The Weeknd. You know, I've always been a little bit surprised that it's taken this long for The Weeknd to really break in the mainstream. But if anything, with R&B's resurgence and his dark, explicit brand of it playing well to the reverb, saturated eeriness that's popular in the indie scene right now, it's an ideal time for him to become popular. For me, I've never really loved him. For as much of some of his debauchery that he engages in can be kind of interesting, I've always found him to be a bit of an underwhelming presence as a singer and songwriter, and was rarely able to wring enough pleasure out of his hedonism to find it seductive, or the insight to really subvert any of that hedonism. It's why he worked so well on the sexual frustration of Love Me Harder with Ariana Grande, which is one of my favorite songs of 2014. Period. So to hear that it's showing up on the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack, I'm sorry, that just made way too much sense to me. I mean, sure, you take some badly rewritten Twilight fanfiction, turn it into a Secretary ripoff, and show a painfully shallow understanding of BDSM that's borderline offensive. And yet, despite how much of a perfect fit you'd think The Weeknd would be for something like this, I'm sorry, I'm really underwhelmed by Earned It. The songwriting is stunningly thin, blowing the opportunity for some potent, explicit lyricism. The vocal production is sloppier than it really should be, especially with the auto-tune and the layering on his falsetto. And as for the instrumentation, well, okay, it's trying to play it all very classy and reserved and romantic with the strings and the piano, and as such, it just feels completely neutered to me. Compared to what The Weeknd could have done with this track, this feels shallow and thin and way too approachable and mainstream, and not nearly as sexual or believable as it could have been. Talk about a letdown. But then again, considering The Weeknd is writing the soundtrack for a high-budget, badly written BDSM porno that was made from people who have no idea what BDSM really is, this song makes perfect sense. I mean, Jesus, when Rihanna made S&M, she did it better than this. Putting all that aside, this week was kind of lousy in terms of some of those hits. For the worst, okay, it's a toss-up between Bad Bitch by French Montana and Jeremih, and Shell Shock by Juicy J, Ty Dolla $ign, and Wiz Khalifa. For best, okay, not much of a choice, but you know what? I'm either gonna give it to Style by Taylor Swift or Something Big by Shawn Mendes, both of which are better than they have any right to be, but are actually pretty good songs. You get these weeks sometimes. Let's hope for better next week, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.